Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspect of running, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This episode is sponsored by Janji. Janji is a local to Boston running apparel company dedicated to exploring, connecting, and giving back through running. Inspired by travel, informed by function, and built for adventure, Janji makes running essentials to equip you wherever you run or roam. The company was founded on the core belief that water is a human right and donates 2% of their sales to supporting clean water organizations around the world. I've known the two co-founders of Janji for over 5 years, and it's been a privilege to see them grow and increase the level at which they've been able to give back to the running community and to the world in general. This episode is also brought to you by UCAN, a sports nutrition product that I love. They're having their Cyber Week sale right now. Head over to UCAN at ucan.co to take advantage of their biggest sale of the year. The code FTLR has been upgraded to 30% off site-wide. Now's the time to try something new. Welcome back. I have Alyx Luck Barnett joining me on the podcast today, all the way from Hawaii. Alyx, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, of course. Good morning. I guess good afternoon to you. Good morning. And I'm honored to be on.
For sure. So before we go too far, who is Alyx?
Oh man, you always have to start with this hard question. And I listen to your podcast all the time, so you'd think I'd be prepared, but
nobody ever is.
Right? It's still a stunningly hard question to sum up. I am a trail runner, a soon-to-be mom, a race director, and a online coach. So I guess that would sum me up as far as what I do, and who I am is a kind of a nerdy hippie.
And you had me on your podcast just a couple days ago. So we're swapping roles here.
Yeah, now the pressure's on because you were one of my favorite guests. So yeah, we would recorded a ton of podcasts because we're obviously a newer podcast, and we'd recorded a ton of podcasts, and we decided to push yours to be one of the very first ones out that we drop because you're one of our favorite guests. So now the pressure is really high.
Awesome. Well, why did you start a podcast?
So I am friends with this girl, Alyssa, and we have lived in the same locations a few times, but oddly, we became better friends over Instagram, as the virtual world would have it. And we just spend hours weekly discussing coaching theory and, kind of comparing notes on clients that may have similar concerns or issues, or hey, have you read this medical article of this study that just came out? And we just go back and forth all the time. And, we'd both thought about starting a podcast on our own. I had actually started one, recorded like 1 or 2 episodes, and didn't like the format of being solo and just deleted it. She has co-hosted on another podcast. And we just felt like we have a lot of really fun conversations, and hopefully they could be of assets to people that maybe want a run coach or can't afford one. So we decided to record a podcast with the intention of people being able to self-coach themselves to a higher level in running, or to improve on things that, they would like to have someone they could ask questions to, but maybe they don't have that person.
I love that. And it's pretty in line with why I started this podcast, which was, having fun and interesting conversations that I felt compelled to share. So when it's organic like that versus, trying to achieve a specific business objective or whatnot, I feel like it comes out cleaner and more entertaining and useful.
Yeah, I really hope so. And we've definitely come up with, we don't really want to make it a business because we're not interested in that side of it. I know a lot of people do, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Some of my favorite podcasts, they obviously make a living or at least some monetary value off of it, and that's great, but that's definitely not our intention behind it. So
For sure. Well, it may happen. It may evolve over time. That's what happened. I mean, I had the same objective. It was like, I just want to share interesting stories and cool people, and then brands were like, hey, we want to talk to your audience. So it's been an interesting evolution, and I think what you said is perfect. It's like it's not the intent, but for some it is, and it works, and for others it sort of evolves that way.
yeah, and if we had a brand that we were like, oh, we both actually really legitimately like this,
right,
sure,
exactly.
I'd share that. But if it was Clorox cleaning wipes, no.
Well, I don't know. In 2020, that's a pretty compelling partnership.
I know, right?
So let's back up, because I think the story of how we actually met is pretty funny. It was in a car, basically driving to. We were at Run Rabbit, so it was in Steamboat Springs last fall, and we had. I don't remember where we were driving to. Probably one of the aid stations, but we spent like the morning buying food and snacks for the day, and we basically just between the four of us, we just like spent the morning in a car eating and running and talking about eating and running.
Yeah, I knew instantly I liked you because of your choices, and I was like, this dude and I could be friends. Like, he doesn't hold back, and I respect that. Obviously, a big part of my career is coaching people with nutrition, and so when I see somebody that really likes food and can balance, loving junk food and still having a healthy life, like, you've earned my respect. So, game one, your food choices, I was like, this dude has it. Like, he has my respect.
Yeah, so we were there for the 100, and you've run a bunch of hundreds, and that was the first one that I had been crewing. So I was just like a little bit in a new world, and it was cool to just sort of follow along with you. And I forget who we were with.
Yeah. So, gosh, so this whole weekend is really fuzzy. I don't know if I even told you, but I had gone on a 20-mile-ish, like give or take a mile in Denver run before, like 2 days, maybe that Wednesday or Thursday. And I had a beer, so I was going to like stop at a couple breweries. I'm a big fan of having a beer during a run. It's one of my favorite things. And I was going to have a beer. I had a beer at like mile 10, and then I was like at like mile 19, like right around from the cottage we were staying at. And this older gentleman was with a group of a couple other older gentlemen, and I didn't think anything of it. I had a Strava shirt on, and they started asking me about running, and they're like, oh, can we buy you a second beer? And I'm like, it's been 4 hours since I've had one. Sure. Like, not a big deal. That's very nice.
Yeah, I remember this.
They put a date rape drug in my beer, and I went from completely sober to 2 or 3 sips into this beer of like, I'm blacking out and things don't feel right. So I text, luckily, the gentleman I was crewing, Wookie, and he came over there, and I just said help. Like, I don't think I said anything else. I don't think he knew what was going on. And luckily he picked me up and I was fine. But the rest of the weekend was still like, until I got to the point of really like flying home, there's bits and pieces of that whole weekend that are fuzzy. So it's it was a weird time. So if I forget something, don't take offense is where it went.
Yeah.
With that, because one of the weirder and scarier experiences of my life.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want to understate, like, that's terrible. And I also I forgot that was the like what was leading up to it. Yeah, that's wild.
I ended up contacting two of the three of the gentlemen were actively high school coaches, and I ended up contacting the schools they worked for, and I don't know if that was ever followed up on.
God.
So I contacted the bar and the schools they worked for and let them know.
Right. Yeah, that seems important. Yeah. So again, don't want to understate the the severity of that, but yeah. And then you were able to persevere and have yourself a hell of a weekend. I think you probably ran like 100 miles that weekend or the next
I
3
don't know.
days.
No, I don't know about that. I think I did like 40 miles with Wookie or so, 40, 45. And then I ran the next morning with a friend. Maybe we ran probably like 10 miles. So, maybe like a 50-mile weekend. But yeah, I still felt pretty good. It was just a really weird, like, there's bits and pieces. I'm like, I don't really remember part of that day. That's odd.
Yeah. The the part that was most memorable for me was it was the like 10 to 2 stretch where we were at the top of the mountain, and it was the, I don't know, 50-mile aid station.
Yeah.
And we were up there just waiting, and we grossly overestimated when we needed to be there. We were there like 4 hours early.
That was probably my fault. I'm always paranoid when I'm visiting or crewing people. I'd rather be there early than miss them. So that was definitely an error on my side. I was like, oh, we have to go now. You're like, oh,
yeah. Well,
we gotta go now. What if they run really fast?
better to be early than late. But it was we got some hiking in, we got some snacking in, and we just hung out. And then so Wookie was the guy you were crewing.
Right.
I was crewing Ryan, who actually was on the podcast recently, and he didn't make it to that aid station. And so I ended up chasing you down the mountain, and you told me that was the fastest anyone's run downhill. I disagree, but as I volunteered on your podcast, I'm terrified of running in like the woods like that, where they were hyping up the mountain lions and cougars and bears and all that stuff. And then running at night is something I'm working on as well. So the funny part about it was, so Run Rabbit allows one pacer. So I didn't want to get too close to you guys, so that Wookie would be disqualified for having two pacers. So, and I wasn't pacing, I was just like trying to get off the mountain. So I was like running, I don't know, like 50 feet behind you guys, and this other guy just like popped up out of nowhere, and we started chatting, and I ended up like running 5 miles with him. And he was like, dude, like, you don't have to run with me. Like it's totally fine. I was like, no. I have to run with you. This is what I must do.
I must do this because there are mountain lions, and I will pace you whether you want to be paced or not.
Yeah. You've got 50 miles on your legs, and I've got 5. So I must do this.
Yeah, I think volunteer pacers that you don't expect are sometimes the best gift on the planet. I had a pacer bail out on me on my very first 100, and I had already gotten lost, which is really embarrassing because it's a very well marked loop race. So we won't go down how embarrassing that is. But I'd already added extra miles to my first 100, which, as you're hyping yourself up, is a hard thing to accept when you're going, oh, and now I have to do an extra 8 miles. And so I had my pacer bail out. They had been up too long and were tired and said I was going too fast. They didn't think they could keep up with me. And this random guy sprinted like 6 miles after he heard I was on my last loop of my first 100. He like sprinted hard, like 6 or 7 miles to catch me and like then deal with the inevitable shit show that I'm sorry, mess that I was. And he paced me through like the slowest last 12 miles in the world of any 100 miler. And it was such a gift because I didn't know him. He was a mountain biker and not really a runner. I don't think he'd ever run a 20-mile loop in his life, he said. And it was so great because I just got to know this random stranger, and it was like the best pacer gift I ever could have had.
That's super cool. Let's back up a little bit. Do you remember your first run before you got into hundreds and beer running and all that fun stuff?
Like first ever run?
First ever run.
Oof. I kind of remember the time. I don't know if it was like my exact first run, but I remember like my first running memories. So I did endurance horseback racing, which is 50 to 100-mile horse races as a kid. And I will always be the first to acknowledge I had a very privileged childhood. My parents' biggest flaw is still to today, like doing too much for me or caring too much. And so I had a lot of horses, and I was able to do this amazing sport that involved traveling all over the country and eventually all over the world to race 50 to 100-mile races. And this is at a very young age. I think I started at 7. And so obviously that sport is the predecessor to ultra running. And there was some crossover because there are people that do both sports. And a family friend of ours, and who I always joke, but probably actually was like my first crush, or the first time I thought a guy was cool, like maybe a little cooler than a girl could be, was this gentleman, Garrett Ford. And I'm guessing he's maybe almost 20 years older than me. So obviously there was nothing there. He's a happily married man, and we're still, Facebook friends, and we talk occasionally. But he did Western States, also known as the Tevis Cup. And I just thought, wow, you can run 100 miles like a horse. And I just thought it was like the coolest, most manly, like toughest thing I could imagine. And I told my parents I wanted to start running. And my dad had done track in, high school, and, like told me stories about how his coach would bike behind them and like smack them if they got too slow. And I just thought it was like the toughest thing any human could do, was like to run long distances. So I think I was probably 7 or 8, probably 8, because I think that's when we got to know the Ford family. So I was probably 8 years old when I started just going outside in the desert in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico and telling my parents, I'll be back in 30 minutes. Or we had like a 3.5-mile long driveway, and it was all this dirt road, like out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember I'd ask my mom if I could get out and run home, and she'd drive the truck behind me because she didn't want me to be gone for, obviously 30 or 40 minutes as a 8-year-old in the middle of the woods. So she would like just drive, I'm so slow, I'm sure, behind me. But I'd always like run next to the truck and ask her, how fast am I going? And I would like always try to go 10 miles an hour because that seemed really fast. And so she'd be like,
Because it
oh,
is.
you're almost to 10. Oh, back to 5. Because obviously a car doesn't show you 7 miles an hour. And I just remember always trying to run really fast so she could say I hit 10 miles an hour at some point. And yeah, those were probably my first memories running, but I don't remember like specifically the very first run.
That's super cool. It's such a different background than most.
Yeah.
So yeah, like very different, and the horse racing and long distance horse racing seems fascinating, and that's it. That was the evolution of the Western States,
Right.
100-miler, right?
Right. Yeah. And so there's actually a lot of crossover, and I've told my partner Billy that eventually I want to do the ride and ties, which is where 2 runners share one horse, and they do these races. And I think it would be really fun because he's a fast runner and I'm mediocre, but I think with my knowledge of that sport, we could actually do really well together. So maybe that's something I'd get back into one day. But
Cool.
it's definitely a fun way to cross over the sports, and there's definitely a lot of similarities, which is why I think ultra running comes pretty naturally to me, because it's something I've really always been a part of.
Super cool. Talk to me about how you evolved from running for 40 minutes next to a truck trying to hit 10 miles an hour to running 100+ mile races. Where did that desire come from to go longer?
So obviously I had grown up very privileged. I've known about ultra running since I was, 6 or 7 years old. Known people in the sport since I was 8. So I've been around it a long time, but I had never done an official ultra run, like a race, like a sanctioned race. I had done, I'd run 30 miles when I was probably 10. I had been a runner, like I got the Runner's World magazine as a kid, and I ran in high school. So I had always kind of associated myself as a runner, but I had never done an ultra. It was on my I'll do that one day bucket list until I fell off a horse in my early 20s, or I guess no, I was probably 19, and it was on the pavement, and the way I landed was kind of a kneeling position, and in the scramble, the horse had fallen, which is why I fell off, and in the scramble to get up, she stepped on my knee and kind of everything in it. So I had a knee surgery a few years later because it had gotten to the point that I couldn't walk without it dislocating, and I had gotten to the point it was constantly, like, everything in it was just torn, which they didn't know at the time. And so I went in for a small surgery, and I was supposed to have, I think, an ACL repair, and it ended up being a partial replacement and like complete reconstruction. So it was like, apparently they had to like get permission from the governor mid-surgery to do everything they had to do because I was under and it was much worse than they thought it was going to be. And I was really young, so they don't allow replacements at a certain age group. It was wild. And the very first physical therapy appointment I had, I walked in and I'm talking to the physical therapist. And at the time I was involved in MMA and boxing and all of that. And I said, well, how long is it going to take until I can get back to that? Because, that was a part of my income. And, I was early 20s. And he goes, oh, well, what do you need to do for the sport? And I'm like, well, I need to be able to run and move side to side. And, because running was kind of how I would cut weight for the sport. And he went, oh, you'll never run again. And I think I just instantly burst out in tears, and I don't think I ever went back to that physical therapist. I was in school at the time and pretty educated about the body. I was already a personal trainer, and I was going to school for massage therapy. And I was just like, I probably said some really choice 4-letter words. And I think that was the last time I was like, I'm going to prove him wrong. And so every year since, I've done a sanctioned ultra, or at least run the ultra distance, like, done a rim to rim to rim, or like done some epic run, just with like the check in the box of that guy will always be wrong. So that's what got me officially into ultras. Somebody telling me I wouldn't.
That's super cool. I think that the like, you can't do it, okay, watch me, is it's motivating.
It is. And, one of my best friends will always joke that I'm fueled well on pettiness and rice balls.
And what was the second part?
Rice balls.
Rice balls. Nice.
Yes.
Pettyism and rice balls, part of your complete breakfast.
Right. Exactly. I can't advertise that, but
that's amazing. So, so that's what got you into it. Why do you keep doing it? Or is it really that, why do you keep doing it?
I'd say the first 1 or 2 or even the 3 or 4 were probably to spite that guy. Mm-hmm. I went into the sport of bodybuilding, and it obviously was very counterproductive. So I'm naturally not someone who builds muscle super easily, especially in my lower body. And so it was always this like struggle is, well, if I'm going to build muscle mass to the type that you need for that sport, my run should be 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And so 99% of my cardio was like stair mill, something that could build strength, but wouldn't actually like help me lose muscle mass. And I did that sport very extensively. It was like my whole hobby for pretty much the rest of my 20s. And it was always this balancing act of, can I do an ultra run without really training for it, just to spite this guy? And then it was like a fun, like, annual event, it gave me a reason to ignore bodybuilding for a couple weeks and focus on a run. And then I'd go right back into, trying to gain the muscle I had just, compromised. But then when I was, I think I was 28. So almost 5 years ago now, I had kind of gotten to where I knew I was almost done with bodybuilding. I was not aware of any of my friends that weren't using steroids. I had gotten to the point where if I wanted to get better in the sport, that was kind of my only option. I had put a lot of time and energy into it, and the gains I could make were going to be so marginal. I was talking about like a half a pound of muscle a year, just very, and it's something that people will chip away at and can do naturally, but the limitations are there so drastic in comparison to people who choose to use performance enhancing drugs. And I don't have a fault with that. It's just, I always knew that I wanted to have a family and that I wanted to be able to tell people I coached that they could get to where I was at. And so I felt if I ever took those, it would be counterproductive, because then, I could be compromising my ability to have a family, and I could be compromising my ability to be honest to the people I worked for. So I started thinking about ultra running as like my next hobby to get into, or my next thing, because I missed it being outside. I really knew that I enjoyed running more than I enjoyed lifting at that point. And I told myself if I could complete a 100-mile run and I didn't hate it, I would start training to do ultra running. So that's a really terrible way to plan for a 100-mile run.
If you didn't hate it, you would do it more. I mean, that checks out.
Yeah. So I don't know. I signed up for a 100-mile run, and I did one 11-mile run first and a lot of hiking with my dogs. And I finished, and I got lost, and I didn't meet the time goal I really wanted. But I finished, and I definitely didn't hate it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And when was that?
That was Javelina 100. Oh gosh, let's see. I want to say 4 years ago now.
Got it. And so you mentioned that you coach as well. How did you get started with coaching, or why did you get started with coaching?
In high school, I had switched from one high school to another to be at the best school in my region for track. There's a really good track coach that when I switched schools, I didn't realize he was also really creepy. And so he ended up like later going to jail. So he was very creepy, but obviously, luckily I never had any issues with him. But I just had this weird intuition as a high schooler that I didn't want to spend extra time with him. And so we were required, and this is part of the reason the track program was so good, is we were required, if we were on varsity, to take 2 PE classes every quarter. So on top of your track practice, you would also have like a weightlifting class and like either athletic training or an additional PE class. And he encouraged everyone to take them with him. But I just had this weird feeling that I didn't want to be around him extra. And so I asked the varsity football coach, if I could do their weightlifting class. And I might have told him I was uncomfortable with the coach, or that it just didn't work with my class schedule. But for whatever reason, they let me. And I got to pretty much lift weights with all the football players. And I was the only girl in the room. And it was, there was obviously some joking and teasing of me. But it was such a cool experience, because I saw these people lifting weights, not for track because it was required, but lifting weights because they wanted to, and they were competing to be stronger than each other. And I just fell in love with it. And at one point I thought maybe I wanted to be a professional football coach. I just thought it was such a cool thing, to lift with the idea of being strong and the idea of that strength turning into a sports performance. And so I really fell in love with the weight room, and I was obviously way weaker than anyone else in there. So I'd always get my own like whole weightlifting setup, which was great because I didn't have to share. And I'm a big fan of not sharing. So it was great. And he let me help him with a few of the guys that were like, linemen, but they were heavier. And he's like, oh, do you have any good track drills for them? Or do you want to like run everybody through a warm up while I go get a cup of coffee? Because I think he was trying to make me not get teased as much. And so he kind of took me under his wing and let me help a little bit. And then I got a job at a Gold's Gym, and this is long before having a certificate as a trainer was required. And I think I'd work the front desk, and then I started kind of training people on the side. And then a few years later, I got a personal trainer license. Like I went to a really great school in Dallas, and yeah, it's just always been a part of my life. I've, gotten degrees and thought, oh, I should have a grown-up job at some point, but I can't. I love coaching. There's nothing I've done. I've had a lot of little jobs here and there for 6 months or a couple years, and I love coaching. That's my favorite thing to do. So
What is it about coaching you love so much?
there's this magic moment, and I think it might be, I've had it compared, I've had people tell me this will be a lot like parenthood, but there's this magic moment when what someone's capable of and what they start to believe they're capable of aligns. And it's the coolest thing on the planet. When you just see, like, because I look at people and I see their potential. I never see, oh, this person has 10 pounds to lose and can't run a mile. I see, oh, this person is going to do their first 5K and they're going to start feeling good about their body. And then they're going to start wanting to eat healthier because they're happy with their body. And I just see this vision of what's going to happen. And when that starts to align with what they think they can do, it's the most magical thing ever. So it's a very selfish pursuit.
Selfish, but selfless at the same time. You're serving somebody else. So how do you create that connection between what you believe somebody is can do and what they believe they can do? So we've shared the same coach, or you've had the coach that I've had in the past, and what I love about David is his ability to get you to believe. And this is the hallmark of a good coach, to, as you said, align your vision of where they can go with where they believe they can go. So I think that's like the hardest part of it too. So how do you do that?
So I wish there was like a perfect formula, but if so, I'd be a millionaire and I'd be coaching coaches. But for me, it's a lot. It took, and that's part of the reason I went back to school. It takes a lot of psychology to understand where people are coming from and to encourage them to find a better mental place. And I am not a therapist, and there has been so many times I have told someone, I can refund your money or I can hold your training for when you're in a better place, but I need you to seek professional help, because there's only a certain amount of good cheerleading and good coaching that I can do. There is a limit. I am not qualified to bring somebody out of, a serious depression or deal with, body dysmorphia or eating disorders. I can help people who have worked on those things or have those things in their past, but there are limitations on what I feel professionally in scope of doing. So all that aside, when I think I can help somebody, like I read one time that for every negative thing you say about yourself, you have to say 10 positive things. So I try to be that field of positivity for people, because I think, we have thousands and thousands of thoughts and decisions every single day. And when somebody is in a negative mindset with themselves or their performance or their body, it is viciously hard to get out of. And so I think understanding how hard those habits are to break, and just being sometimes both a receptacle of hearing those thoughts and then counteracting them, and then trying to teach people patterns or habits or things that can, weigh out that and give them that positivity. I think too, it's important to remember that progress is never linear. And so you might get somebody to start thinking, oh, I can do better. I can do better. And then all it takes is for them to like go out and do their run or their workout, and they're a little bit tired and they don't have the best day ever. And they're like, oh man, I'm terrible. And so it's just remembering that, okay, well, that's great, but it's been 3 days since they text me and said they're terrible. And before they were saying that to themselves 100 times a day. And so just being that constant cheerleader and giving them positivity back in a world that can be so negative. So that's really my best advice, is just be overwhelmingly positive, even to the point of annoying them with it.
Nice. Thanks again to Janji for sponsoring this episode. Janji Collective members will get a special discount over Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And as a reminder, you can join the Janji Collective for $50, where 100% of your fee goes to supporting clean water initiatives worldwide, and you'll always get a discount. If you use the code FTLR, you'll also get a free singlet. And now back to our conversation. What has been your biggest challenge with coaching in 2020?
Oh, in 2020, I think obviously people are stressed. When this all started really going crazy in like February, March, I had a lot of my clients lose their jobs, and I did a lot of pro bono and a lot of refunding of people. And looking at it from a business standpoint, I probably should not have refunded everyone that lost their job, because I pretty much paid back anyone that had committed to training in the last several months. I just was like, hey, here's your money back. Don't worry about it. Contact me when things stabilize. Not the best business decision, but, I think things kind of, what comes around goes around. And I think that I've had clients start picking back up, and I've gotten to, my life is normalized a lot with that. And I think it's just been counteracting the extra negativity or the extra stresses that people are dealing with. And I've seen a lot of my clients that are normally more stable or more cheerful or more positive really struggle. And that's just been emotionally hard for me, because I hate seeing people struggle. So just trying to be there for them and making them realize that, sometimes progress is just not backtracking. And sometimes progress is just staying afloat right now and letting people and helping people learn to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think it's like giving yourself grace and giving yourself the ability to like ride the waves.
Yeah, and just I like that. That's actually weirdly a term that pops up in a lot of these like pregnancy books that I've been reading. It's talking about like riding the wave of discomfort versus letting yourself be drowned by it. And so I really like that term, just telling people like, hey, you just have to stay afloat. And if, a wave crashes on you, that's fine. There's time to get out of it before the next one hits. And just trying to remind people of that. So I really like that analogy.
Oh, that is good. I like that expansion on it. Like there's time to get out of it before the next one hits.
Right. And just knowing that unfortunately, sometimes a whole set comes in and you end up in the whitewash, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the whole concept of like, if life were easy, it would be boring. And for a lot of people, I feel like that's why they run. There's a lot of research on high performing people in their career doing endurance training to introduce more discomfort into their life, because they crave that uncertainty and they crave that discomfort. And I think that a lot of people would be better served. I'm talking mostly to non-runners. A lot of people would be better served to experience discomfort in the way that we experience it in running, because the more you experience it, the more you can overcome it. And that translates into life. Like if you are consistent in running, you're going to have these ups and downs, but you're going to get better along the way. And there's no better parallel for life than riding these ups and downs and then being better for it.
Well, and that too is, and when you think about it from an exercise standpoint, exercise is a discomfort that you can control. You can decide how hard you push into it, or, you know, how minimal you make it. And that's a really nice feeling, because in a world that we don't have in reality that much control over, it's really nice to play, if you will, with discomfort that you have control over. And that can teach you in a very Montessori kind of way, of how much of it you can handle and how much of it you want to handle. And when you do that, you learn the best coping mechanisms for it. So,
yeah,
you know, you might not want to run very fast or very hard 90% of the time, but that 10% of the time that you do, you learn, oh, you know what? I came out of that okay. And then when something in life, you know, hits, you get a flat tire and you're late to work and your cell phone screen cracks when you're getting out of the car to look at your flat tire. You're like, oh, well, I got through something hard already this week. And so you're in a better mental place for it.
Totally. I think that's like the whole point. I did a podcast with a woman named KK Fisher who loves to run very, very long distances. And I was like, why are you doing a 240-mile race? And she said, it's a sandbox with limited risk, meaning if she screws up, it's not the end of the world. But if she screws up with her kids or with her partner or whatever, like that has more significant impact or more significant consequences. So to be able to experiment and, as you said, like understand that 10% of the hard stuff and then see how you deal with it and see how you cope with it. And I like how you put it, like find the coping mechanisms and strategies to get better. If you find that in running, it's in a technically lower risk. I mean, unless you're, you know, in 130 degrees in the desert, or, you know, it's, you fall off the side of the Grand Canyon or like something like that. For the most part, it's pretty low risk from a life perspective, but the takeaways can be huge.
Right.
Yeah. I think the what you said a few minutes ago about how to, like, you've experienced this discomfort and it's anything else in that week is not going to be as hard. That was how I got through 2019, which was a pretty brutal year with a breakup and a loss of my grandfather, which was the first like close loss that I had with a family member. And meanwhile, my running was better than it had ever been. Both objectively, like I PR'd in the marathon by 20 minutes, and subjectively, I was enjoying it and like crushing workouts and feeling incredible. So I had this parallel of life was really hard, but running was really awesome. And physically, it was the most challenging it had ever been. But it was showing me that, like, look, I can get through this. And I would go into these conversations that I didn't want to have thinking like, this is a challenge. I get to be uncomfortable and see what I'm made of, essentially.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think you and I talked about actually on my podcast a little about how it's really important to use running as a place to sort your thoughts, but it shouldn't be your therapy.
Yes.
I love that. Like, it's such a great time to experiment with being a little bit uncomfortable or pushing yourself a little or having, you know, small wins in the scheme of life. But, you know, it's also like, if that's the only reason you're running, then there's an issue. And so it's finding that perfect balance, I think, between the two.
Yeah. One thing that keeps coming up is like running can be therapeutic. I don't think it can be therapy.
I love that so much.
Yes, it is. That's a hill I'll die on. I think that a lot of people say running is my therapy, and it's like, well, you would love therapy then.
Right.
So talk to me.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have this pipe dream with one of my friends. She's going to be the most amazing therapist ever. And we've talked several times, it's just a debate of location, about opening a clinic where someone comes in, and I've gotten to train in Boulder and work out at like some very unique, like high end, sports clinics for like pro athletes that I'm not. But they have this like whole wellness incorporation where you go in and you work out and you get a massage, and then you sit in the recovery chair and you see a chiropractor and you do your physical therapy, whatever else. But we wanted to include having so you have all of that, but you work out and you get in this good mind space with a trainer or, whatever. And then you go in and you have a therapy session, and then you have like a massage or something that kind of like heals you and encourages to like let all of that settle in. And so we always talk about opening this like practice that would have both physical fitness and mental health, as well as like, something emotional or, something for your healing, and kind of just this nice space. So
I think that people would need like a 3-hour nap after getting home
definitely
from that.
But I've learned that being a trainer for so many years is people have told me things that I know they have not told their therapist, they have not told their spouse. They like, when you're exercising, I definitely understand a lot of people are able to better unpack or open up to some emotions and some thoughts that maybe they're normally pretty physically shut off for, but that dump of endorphins allows them to tap into those things. And so it really is interesting, the idea of combining the two, is like having a run and then having a therapy session. But
definitely, I love it.
Exclusively one or one.
Why is mental health something that's important to you?
I just have seen so many people that from an outward perspective, everything is amazing and they struggle. And it just makes me really sad to see people that are, lest I sound harsh, they're unaware of their privilege. They're unaware of how good they have it. And I know that doesn't take away from whatever pain or hurt or discomfort they feel. And, I don't want to minimize that, but wow, they have it great. Like, you're telling me your problems, but yet you have the money to pay for a private gym and a personal trainer or a coach. And I'm just like, dude, go to another country and look at people that don't have the money to eat and they don't know if their kids are going to live because they can't feed them. And I know that sounds terrible to minimize someone's pain, but like I said, I'm not a therapist for a reason. I'm maybe not the most compassionate person, but I do really care about people's mental health. I definitely don't have all of the answers as to how to improve it. That's something I'm always trying to, help as a coach to some level. But, and my mom was a psychiatric nurse for 40 years. So I do find,
that plays a role.
Yeah. So she would tell me stories, and I do find mental health, and, obviously hers were like, this guy was, has 17 personalities, and he was talking to, the devil yesterday, and he's also thinks he's a drag queen, but he's also a woman in 4 of his personalities. And I'm like, wow, the mind is so cool. Yeah. So, I obviously, in extreme cases, mental health is fascinating from a scientific perspective, but just on a day-to-day level of American mental health, it's a wild unawareness of how privileged and great we have it as a country and collectively as a people. And so it's always interesting to me.
Definitely. On the topic of privilege, I had a conversation with a friend on the podcast, Dana Bogan, and she's a social worker. And some of her commentary was like, the hardest part about mental health is that oftentimes the people who really need it and really need it to work through their day-to-day are the ones that don't have access to it. And I think that's like the hardest part. That I saw a tweet the other, or it was today maybe, that said, America, where you have health insurance, but it doesn't cover your mouth, teeth, or brain. It's like,
how do you know what my health insurance policy looks like?
Right. And it's bizarre. It's like, okay, those that have health insurance, it's like from the neck down. Why is that the case? And yeah, it's just bizarre.
Yeah, it's wild to me because my partner Billy is a special education teacher here in Hawaii, and my mom worked specifically in children's mental health. So she worked in other areas, but for the most part of her career, she was working with teenage boys like 12 or 13 to 17. And a lot of them were avoiding jail or had been in and out of jail or, had other things going on, obviously. And Billy works with 6th and 7th grade, mostly 6th grade special ed students. And the state of Hawaii does not have any mental health services for children. They do not have a mental health hospital for children. They have very limited mental health bed capacities for adults even. And so a lot of the issues that Hawaii specifically as a state deals with is in mental health with our homeless population, because there isn't a location that can actually help them. There might be a shelter if you can get them to one to stay at for a night, but there's no resource that could get them connected into, I don't know, having a state ID and having, a service where they could maybe get medicine or treatment. And there's nothing for children at all. And so many of the kids that Billy teaches are stuck in the special education system, pushed in a public school that has to serve them because it's a requirement by law. But unfortunately, a lot of these kids are dangerous to the other students or dangerous to the teachers or themselves or their siblings. And it's heartbreaking to me to see that the state just ignores the mental health issues of anyone under the age of 18. And in doing so compromises the safety and, mentality of the teachers and the students in the public school system. So it's an interesting area of our country that I think just gets ignored.
Yeah, but I think it's being talked about, and finally it's being desired to have some change. At least so it seems.
Yeah, I think talking about things is progress, but I do think it's interesting that it's 2020 and I just feel like our country is so far behind, but we could have, I'm sure, 20 podcasts on how disenfranchised I feel about our country right now. So.
20 hours of that discussion, yes.
And then you'll get a lot of email. I don't want to listen to a political podcast.
I'm doing a podcast with a woman named Tina Mir next week, and actually, by the time that this airs, it will be out. So go check out her podcast to listen to our conversation. But we're talking about that exact point about the, stick to running, pick your lane, stay in your lane. This is all everybody's lane. And it's important to have these conversations. It's important to care about things that are, outside of your blinders. And I think that's, again, that's happening more, and talking about it is an easier first step than actually doing something about it, but it's still something, and it's still indicating that we're at least trending in the right direction, which is a cause for optimism.
Yeah, I have a few women that I would consider newer, but, quality friends. And it's been really interesting to see how they've taken their sporting careers and been able to use them for political and environmental reasons. And a lot of people, I think, will give them hate or say, that's not what you are, you're just an athlete. But to put someone in a box is a real choice of privilege. And I think to say that you don't care about politics, or that you don't want to discuss global warming, or that you don't want to discuss, racial issues in our country, like that's coming from a very high place of privilege. And honestly, it just shows ignorance to me.
Completely agree. Switching gears a little bit, talking about balance. It's a topic that I like to discuss on this podcast, and some people believe that it can and should exist, and other people believe that it shouldn't exist. So where do you fall on that spectrum?
So I think that if you want to perform well, you will not have balance for a certain period or season of your life. So if you are, and I don't want to minimize anyone else's goals, but if you're going to the Olympics or you're making a career off of, winning a certain race, a marathon or Western States or something, then I think there is a time and a place to have zero balance and to go all in and to lose sight of where anything else is, because that's your goal and it's okay to be singly focused. I think 99.9% of people would do better for themselves, both professionally and for health in the long run, to have more balance and more awareness of what that should look like for them. So I don't think, as someone who has gone on both extremes, with bodybuilding being an extremely consuming sport, it consumes your sleep, your food, your thought processes, every bit of your day. It has to be so detailed, whereas running is this, neat sport. You can put it in a box. Yeah, yes, you should recover. Yes, you should eat well. Yes, you should sleep well. But you can still cram running in 45 minutes or 2 hours a day. And then it's just this part of your life. But with bodybuilding, it's this whole consuming thing. So I've definitely lived in a life that is not balanced. And I definitely would promote people to live a life that is balanced, unless the goal or thing that they're doing is so great that they're willing to sacrifice other things and they're willing to realize what that might look like. So to, I guess, better color it, I've asked clients, is this 100-mile race worth a divorce? And they'll come back and, 99% of the time that's going to be a no. And I'm like, okay, I still think you can finish the 100-mile race. But if it's your wife's birthday this weekend, I don't care what your long run looks like. I care how happy your wife is. And maybe you don't get a run in this weekend. Maybe your wife feels like you set everything down and had a whole weekend party for her. And that's going to be way more valuable in 10 years than I got one extra long run in before this 100-miler. And so I think most people just really need more balance.
Yeah, I think that's a good lens to look at it with.
And this is coming from somebody who's had a divorce. And I would say that that my living out of balance was definitely not the reason behind the divorce, but it probably did not help that marriage at all. And I am very grateful to him for putting up with me in that season of my life. And I hope, one day we could be casual friends. That's not something that we found to be at this point. It's only been a few years, but I hope that in reflection, he could realize that I appreciate that he put up with me for those years of me competing as a professional and everything having to revolve around that, because that's a very self-centered endeavor anytime you go all in and live out of balance. And for anyone around you, it has to be hard.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
A prior podcast guest explained it in a very similar way. Mary Johnson, who is also a coach, and she also talked about it as a season. And some seasons you're all in one thing, and some seasons you're all in on another. But you can't remain all in on one thing all the time and expect anything to keep going well.
Yeah, and as my partner puts it, because I've gave him this, I tried to pitch it to him because he's a much better and more talented runner than I am, and I'm like, hey, you're in your mid-30s. If you're gonna go for it in running, like now's the season. Now's really the time. Like, I want you to consider, do you want to go all in? Do you want to try to break the 24-hour world record? Do you want to try to, see if you can get anywhere near the 100-mile time? Do you want to try to qualify for the Olympics and the marathon? And he looks at me like I was crazy, and he goes, no, I wouldn't like myself, and that wouldn't be a healthy balance with running. And I'd have to compromise my life for running. Like, why would I want to do that? I'm like, well, I don't know. You have the chance that you could go to the Olympic trials, or, I think he legitimately could, break at least the American record for 24-hour running. And I was like, trying to sell it to him. And he's like, no, that would make my balance with running unhealthy, and it could take some of the joy out of it. I absolutely don't want to.
Quite a perspective.
Right. And I was like, wow, I've never known somebody who's so balanced. I could strive to get there, I guess.
Yeah. Amazing.
So he's taught me a lot about that topic, I guess.
You'll have to keep working on him, because I'd love to have him on the podcast and dig more into that.
Yeah, as long as you don't go into how he got into the running world or known in the running world, I'm sure he'd love to talk to you.
We won't talk Born to Run.
Then I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. It's just he's been sidelined on a few podcasts where they promised him that, and then they're like, "So tell me about this day and this day," and he's like, "Oh man, another one."
Got it. Well, awesome, Alyx. I don't want to. We could do this for hours, so I guess we'll have to save some of it until we're on a mountain together again soon, which hopefully can happen in 2021. But until then, where can people find you if they want to follow along with your adventures and your coaching and your running around Hawaii? Yeah,
so probably easiest on social media. It's Dr. Alyx Barnett. It's Alyx. My mom read too many romance novels. So I can't say anything, though. We know what we're naming our kid, and, I'm sure he's going to say the same thing. But so just Dr. Alyx Barnett on pretty much everything. And I think it's Alyx Luck on Facebook, because they wouldn't let me update it. But it's pretty easy to find. And then the podcast we recently started is Coaches on the Run. So that's on Spotify, and it should be on Apple in the next few days. And hopefully your episode will be live so people can hear all of your wisdom.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for coming on this podcast.
Of course. I appreciate it so much. It's good to catch up a little bit.
Likewise.
Bye.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.